Most people have absolutely no idea how long their pension will last. They have a number in their head, maybe a rough sense of what they're spending, and they assume it'll be fine. This video is about actually running the numbers, because the results might surprise you, and in some cases, they'll alarm you. And either way, you deserve to know. Let's start with something that sounds obvious, but most people have never properly sat down and thought about. Your pension has to do one job. It has to pay you an income from the day you retire until the day you die. That's it. And the problem is that neither of those dates is fixed. You can choose when you retire, roughly. You cannot choose when you die, which means you're planning for a duration you don't know, and you have to plan for the longer end of that range, because running out of money at 83 is not a risk you can afford to get wrong. The average 65-year-old man in the UK today will live to around 85. The average 65-year-old woman will live to around 87. But those are averages, and averages include people who die at 66 and people who die at 100. If you're in reasonable health at 65, non-smoker, no major chronic conditions, you have a meaningful chance of reaching 90. Some of you watching this will make it past 95, which means your pension might need to last 30 years, not 15, not 20, 30 years. And almost every mistake people make in retirement planning comes from underestimating that number. Now, let's look at what you actually have. Say you've got a pension pot of £300,000. That feels like a lot of money, and it is. But let's see what it actually buys you in practice, because a number sitting in an account is very different from a number that has to sustain your life for 3 decades. If you want to turn that into a guaranteed income for life, you'd buy an annuity. At current rates, £300,000 might get you somewhere around £15,000 to £17,000 a year before tax. Add the full new state pension of around £11,500, and you're looking at a combined income of roughly £26,000 to £28,000 a year. For a lot of people, that's workable, though it's not comfortable, and it doesn't leave much room for anything unexpected. But a lot of people don't buy annuities anymore. Since the pension freedoms of 2015, most people go into drawdown, which means keeping the money invested and taking out what they need each year. And this is where planning gets significantly more complicated, because now you're managing 2 things at once: how much you're taking out and what your investments are doing while you take it. Those 2 things interact in ways that aren't always obvious, and getting the balance wrong can be catastrophic in slow motion. You don't notice it immediately. You notice it 10 years later when the numbers no longer add up. There's a rule of thumb called the 4% rule. The idea is that if you take out 4% of your pot in year 1 and increase that amount with inflation each year, history suggests your money has a strong probability of lasting 30 years, even through market downturns. On a £300,000 pot, 4% is £12,000 a year. Add the state pension, and you're at around £23,500. Possible to live on, but not luxuriously. On a £500,000 pot, you're drawing £20,000, giving you around £31,500 combined. That starts to feel more comfortable for most people. Before we go further, consider subscribing to the channel, as I will be uploading more content like this. Now here's where people go wrong. They take out more than 4% in the early years because retirement is new and they want to enjoy it, which is completely understandable. A long-haul holiday, helping a child with a deposit, finally doing the kitchen extension. None of those things are wrong in isolation, but the financial consequences compound over time in a way that isn't immediately visible. If you take out 6% a year instead of 4%, your pot runs out significantly faster. On a £300,000 pot, the difference between those 2 withdrawal rates can mean your money running out 8 to 12 years earlier, depending on what markets do. That is not a small rounding error. That could be the difference between being financially comfortable at 85 and being entirely dependent on the state pension at 78. And it's not just the higher withdrawals themselves that cause the damage. It's that you're removing more units from your investment pot, leaving fewer to benefit from any eventual recovery. And that's before we talk about the thing that silently destroys retirement income. Inflation. £20,000 a year today will not feel like £20,000 a year in 15 years. At 3% inflation, which is actually modest by recent standards, the purchasing power of that income halves in about 23 years. And the things that retired people spend most on, energy, food, care costs, private health, all tend to inflate faster than the general headline rate. So the income that feels adequate today may feel genuinely tight in your mid-80s, which is precisely when your costs are likely to go up rather than down. There's a spending pattern in retirement that researchers have documented fairly consistently. People spend more in the early go-go years when they're active and finally have time. Spending drops in the middle slow-go years as people naturally slow down. And then costs often spike again in the later no-go years because of care needs, mobility aids, home adaptations, and sometimes residential care. The average cost of a care home in the UK is currently somewhere between £35,000 and £50,000 a year. If you need 2 or 3 years of that, and a significant proportion of people do, you're looking at a substantial 6-figure sum arriving at the end of your life when your pot has already been drawn down for 15 or 20 years. If you want the full step-by-step on how to actually claim what you're owed, I've put it all in one place. It's called Get What You're Owed, and it walks you through every benefit, pension and tax refund with the forms to use and the numbers to call. The link's in the description. So how do you actually run the numbers for yourself? You need 3 things. You need to know what you have, you need to know what you'll spend, and you need to stress test both of those against time. What you have means your total pension pot, any other savings or investments, your state pension forecast, any defined benefit pension income, any rental income, and any part-time work you're planning to continue. Add all of that up. That's your income picture. What you'll spend means being genuinely honest with yourself about your actual lifestyle, not what you think you should spend, what you actually spend. Most people underestimate this by 20 to 30% when they first do this exercise, because spending is lumpy. It doesn't arrive in neat monthly packages. There are quarterly bills, annual renewals, irregular car costs, dental bills. Go through 12 months of real bank statements, add it all up, then add a buffer of at least 10 to 15% for the things you've forgotten. Then you stress test. You ask, what happens if I live to 95? What happens if inflation averages 4% for the next decade? What happens if markets fall 30% in my first 3 years of retirement, which is the worst possible time for that to happen, because you're selling units at depressed prices every month to fund your income? What happens if I need care at 82 and it costs £2,000 a month for several years? None of these are unlikely scenarios. They are all things that happen to ordinary people. The question is whether your plan survives them. Here's what's genuinely reassuring though. Most people have more flexibility in retirement than they realize, and flexibility is enormously valuable because it means you can respond to what actually happens. You can reduce your withdrawals in bad market years and spend from a cash buffer instead. You can defer your state pension if you're still doing some work, increasing it permanently when you eventually claim. You can downsize and release capital. You can do a small amount of paid work covering even just £5,000 or £6,000 a year. And that alone dramatically extends how long the rest of your pot lasts